something. Today I will introduce plot for Parson'S pleasure. First, what is plot? Plot is a chain of events that make up a story. There were 6 main structures in the plot. First is exposition, inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. The exposition in this short story is Mr. Buggis is an antiques dealer in Chester, London. He doesn't have a large shop, but he still manages a tidy income each year. He always pretends to be a priest to make people more trust in him and buy valuable furniture cheaply from country people. Second, inciting incident. The inciting incident in this short story is one day Mr. Buggis arrived at a farm. There were 3 men, Mr. Romain, Bert, and Cloud. He saw a very rare commode that would cost at the market about £20,000 in Mr. Romain's living room. So Mr. Buggis started to persuade Mr. Romain to sell that commode. The rising action in this short story is Mr. Buggis offered £10 for that commode and say he will only use it legs for his coffee table. He also used different tricks to show that commode is worthless, and Mr. Romain started to believe it. Then, the climax in this short story is finally Mr. Romain agreed to sell that commode at £20. The following action in this short story is after Mr. Buggis left to get his car, Mr. Romain and his son Bert start to worry that Mr. Buggis' car is too small to fix that commode, and he will back out from this deal. The resolution part for this short story is therefore the 3 men decide to help him out by cutting the leg off for him. Therefore, they take the table apart and leaving us in surprise. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sally T. Isang. I will talk about the protagonist and the antagonist in this short story. In this short story, the protagonist, the main character in this short story is Mr. Cyril Buggis. According to my interpretation, he is an antique furniture seller. He is clever and skilled in convincing people, and he is proud of himself because of this. Example, he pretends and dress out as a priest so that people will trust him and allow him to enter their house to look at the furniture. Furthermore, he is cunning as he deceives people and tells lies. Example, he also tricked the owner of the house into selling him valuable furniture very cheaply by making them to think the piece of furniture is worthless. He is self-motivated and good at role-playing. He is also greedy because he tries to decrease the price of the table while he is bargaining, even though Mr. Ramis has already offered a price for far below than its real values. The antagonists in this short story are Mr. Ramis and his son Bert and Cloud. Mr. Ramis and his son Bert are local farmers. Cloud, their neighbor who had dropped in a ramen in the hope of getting a piece of pork. They are suspicious about Mr. Buggis' interest in furniture, but still Mr. Buggis tricks them into a selling of a real commode only for £20 by saying that it is worthless.
Next, I'm going to talk and discuss about the setting of this short story. The setting of this short story is sometimes external and sometimes internal. This short story, Parson'S Pleasure, mainly takes place at the countryside in England, specifically in the county of Buckinghamshire, in the village of Brill, where the climax of the story happened. Mr. Buggis visits several houses in the village. There is no specific time reference stated in this short story, but we are sure that it happens on a sunny Sunday in summer. The usual time when Mr. Buggis goes for trips from houses to houses to seek for potential furniture that he can buy. From the information that we got from a reliable source through the internet, This short story is believed to have happened in the late of 20th century or in the beginning of the 21st century. Apart from that, the atmosphere of this short story is important as the mood of the readers will be affected by the atmosphere presented by the story. One of the aspects of atmosphere that we can find in Parson'S Pleasure is suspense. This short story raises the attention and curiosity of readers when the main character, Mr. Boggis, finds a famous and invaluable 17th century commode in a dirty farmhouse, which he believes is one of the famous pieces known as the Chippendale commode. The suspense continues to arise when Mr. Rumins, the owner of the farmhouse, and his two sons are not convinced to sell the furniture to him. This makes the readers wonder if Mr. Boggis will be able to buy the antique furniture from them or not. Lastly, there are several moods which appear in this short story. In the beginning of this short story, it is dull because the story describes how Mr. Boggis discovers the method of earning money by becoming a dealer, such as buying a nice antique furniture at a low price and selling it at a high price. After that, the mood becomes more interesting and thrilling when Mr. Boggis discovers the antique that worth £20,000 and how he tries to convince and fool Mr. Rumins and his two sons to sell the commode to him. Lastly, the story ends with a sad and disappointing mood because Mr. Boggis faces the consequences of lying to the locals, which is Mr. Rumins and his two sons. They cut the legs from the commode as they heard that Mr. Boggis mentioned that he only wants the leg to repair his table, but in fact, Mr. Boggis wants the whole commode to be sold to him.
Hello guys, my name is Debilan. Today I want to explain the two parts, which is theme and the irony that I take over in this story, Parson'S Pleasure. There are many things in this story. We can see that the rare selfishness, persistent pursuit of wealth, and the fraud all can be considered as a theme in this story. All the deeds of the Mr. Boggis, who is the main character in this story, are the example of the greed and the selfishness. He advised other people to be rich, but he buys the valuable furniture for lower price and he wants to get more and more. Next, I will simply explain the irony, three main irony in this story. First, for the sentence in spite of this rather countless quality of his, Mr. Boggis was not a fool. We can see that the irony in this sentence structure first suggests that Mr. Boggis is quite outlandish, but second part clarifies that he is not crazy yet. The conviction of Mr. Boggis being full outlast. Second, a dear old cookie man and a station wagon somehow never seem quite right together. Throughout the incompatibility, features are mixed together in this sentence. Example, picture of old Parson and a large car for transportation of furniture. These conditions therefore achieve the mocking tone. Okay. Then the third one is the face was round and rosy and quite perfect for the part, and the two large brown eyes poke out at you for this rosy face and get the impressions of gentle imbecility. This shows the irony due to the physical destruction of the clergy man and leads to remark that the persons appear to be an idiot. That's all for my part. Thank you.
Hello guys, now I gonna tell you about the conflict of this short story, Parson'S Pleasure by Roald Dahl. The conflict starts with Mr. Boggis seeing a very famous and invaluable 17th century commode table inside a dirty farmhouse, which he believes is one of the famous pieces known as the Chippendale commode, what will cost in market about £20,000. He sees the owner, Mr. Rumins. He tried to convince Mr. Rumins by telling a lot of deceiving tricks. Mr. Rumins offered £10 for the commode and said that he will only use its leg for his coffee table. He used different tricks to show Mr. Rumins that the commode is very old and is worthless. Mr. Rumi started to believe it. Mr. Rumi agreed to sell the commode for £20. Mr. Bugis have to struggle, and he managed to convince Mr. Rumi to sell the table at the end. Even after he is convinced, Mr. Bugis tried to decrease the price by telling Mr. Rumi he just want the leg of the table. He managed it too. Mr. Rumi is convinced to sell the table, but he and his son think the Parson'S car will not suit for carrying the large commode table. Thus, Mr. Rumi decides to cut off the leg of the commode and make the rest of the furniture into a firewood. The conflict of this short story is man vs man between Mr. Bugis and Mr. Rumi. Mr. Bugis tried to deceive Mr. Rumi, and Mr. Rumi resist him. Then they start to bargain. That's all.
It's my turn to talk about my part, which is point of view and purpose of the story, The Parson'S Pleasure by Roald Dahl. For the point of view, it is third-person omniscient. We have access to Mr. Bugis' feelings and thoughts, but we can only make interpretations about the thoughts of Mr. Rumi and his sons through the action, like questioning Mr. Bugis. After reading the story, I also knew the message from the story and know the purpose of writing the story. Firstly, the story told us we should think smart. For the example, Mr. Bugis go to countryside for his antique business. In order to fulfill his desire for finding some valuable supplies for his antique furniture, he is willing to be a parson because the country's people never have doubt on the church people. Moreover, we should become sociable with everyone around us so that we could communicate with them better. For the example, Mr. Bugis can communicate with different kinds of people. He also a sweet talker when buying or selling his antique furniture. He can even switch to whichever mood suits his client the best. For the bad example, Mr. Bugis disguised as a parson because he knows the country's people will never have doubt to the church people. By doing it, Mr. Bugis is able to perform his mission to deceive them to sell their furniture in order to obtain the stocks of antique furniture for his client. That's all of my part. Thank you.